Hey everyone, Margarita here. I want to talk in this video today about how I've been banned from all of the hospitals as a patient and as a visitor that are anywhere within driving distance of my house. So, all of this pertains to my mother having Munchausen by proxy and working in the medical system for 45 years before retiring, and the false information that she has pulled others aside during the beginning of mine and my son's injury and got them to enter into our medical files. And also, once my dad became injured 2.5 years ago, she then started making false statements to people near the top level, who are in charge at the different hospitals, and making statements that are all false about me, who I am as a person, certain behaviors. I'll get more into this in a minute. But she knows how all of that works and the exact things to say to hospital employees to get one banned because of her knowledge from working in the medical system for 45 years. So she knows exactly the things, that would get somebody banned, should something, come about or any of these things be true. None of this is true. None of what's been entered into our medical files, none of what's been said about me as a visitor or a patient, none of this stuff is true. So, I mean, this is verifiable as well. So I'll get into that in a second. But this pertains to several different hospital systems, and I would be better off if I needed to seek emergency medical help. I would be better off either most likely going into Ohio to try to seek medical help. If I were to need emergency medical treatment, which I did need emergency medical treatment for a very long time and was still left with no treatment initially, and that's how my son and I ended up patients at the private center for 6 years. So if it was not for that, if it was not for my life's work, we would have never survived the injuries. And it doesn't matter. We're both permanently injured, living modified lives for the rest of our lives. Part of that is due to the length of time we were left with no treatment. And I will do another episode into the Munchausen by proxy, more about the different forms of it that she has. One of the forms is withholding medical treatment. So they're two separate situations on why my son and I cannot get treatment within the traditional medical system, and visiting my dad once his injury happened 2.5 years ago. She right away started trying to have me banned from different hospitals, which she was successful at. And ironically, in the very beginning of his injury, about 10 days in, I had made a police report in the city where he fell, or the city where that hospital is where he fell, because they have no knowledge of who I am. They don't know anything about my mother or me. They've never heard of me, because it was further out. So me making a report there, they weren't going to have a biased opinion about anything I was saying. And I said in the beginning that I just needed this all on paper, legally documented. I wasn't expecting them to do an investigation or do anything about it right then and there in that moment, but I knew what was going to happen down the line. So it was stated in that initial police report what she was going to try to do, the different things that she was going to try to do, the different crimes she was going to commit. And now where we are today, she has committed all of those crimes. But the fact of the matter is, I have this in a police report before they even happened, because that's how she operates, and I'm very well aware of it. She's been getting away with decades of serious crimes. So when it comes to what happened with my son and I and why we can't get treatment, because we've been injured longer, since 2018, the injury became known and severe. And for that first 14 months, we were seeking treatment in the traditional medical system. However, my mother was still working before she retired. She didn't retire until the beginning of 2020. And we could not get treatment. I did not understand why initially. And I was in such an extreme fight for my life, in an extreme state of suffocation, brain swelling, all continuous, extreme nausea, extreme diarrhea, extreme, all all types of different symptoms. The carbon monoxide was so overloaded in my entire system, it was flowing up and down my entire body. And I stayed that way. I stayed that way for almost 3 years before the bulk load of it was removed. And there's still an ongoing problem because any little exposure to any chemical toxin or gas, doesn't have to be carbon monoxide, it can be any, but especially carbon monoxide is 100 times more lethal to us than it is somebody else. Due to that still being overloaded in our system, due to the permanent effects and how long we were left untreated, that is still the situation. Any little bit that we take in adds to what's already in our system, and we become very sick very fast. Numerous symptoms that stay continuous until that load is cleared that we had recently taken it. But this is also part of why we require ongoing treatment still to this day, which is hyperbaric oxygen treatments. There are other things I am doing to remove this from my system as well. I am doing more than what I'm doing for my son. For me, and my injury is worse than his, and I've had many more brain injuries than he did. So I'll talk about all the different methods I've used to remove all that stuff in a different video down the line, because I'm not ready to give up all of that information just yet to the public, because it would, there's numerous reasons why. But I will talk about all of that down the line. And so when it came to us getting treatment, when we first became injured, I was so messed up. I couldn't get from point A to point B. I was in an extreme state of pain and suffering, and that pain was in my brain. And then at the same time, all these particles of the carbon monoxide had flooded my entire system, and they were loaded in my entire system, and I was stuck that way. So I was in an altered state of consciousness as well, because I had no oxygen getting to my brain or any of my organs properly. And it stayed that way for almost those first 14 months as well. So when we were trying to seek help, emergency help, when this was going on, because I sought treatment at, I think it was 22 or 23 facilities, all different types of doctors and specialists and neurologists and psychiatrists, psychologists. I tried to see many different people, because it was such an extreme injury. I needed more than one type of medical professional involved, and I needed our medical records to properly reflect what was actually going on. And in the beginning, this was never done. Even though my primary doctor's office was very well aware it was carbon monoxide poisoning and what caused it, none of that was ever questionable. Because the guy didn't know me prior to me giving birth while suffering from the carbon monoxide poisoning, he didn't become my doctor till after that. He didn't understand who I was as a person and what I actually had going on in my life, and that my life had been on hold. So because of the type of office he had and the type of patients he was seeing, he just kind of blended me in with that category of people, when I'm the exact opposite of those type of people. But he couldn't see it because he didn't know me, and I was still already injured and sick, just not really aware of what was going on. So yes, he knew from day one what was going on. I now have a different primary doctor. That doctor left the practice after COVID happened. So where I'm at now, the office I'm at now, there isn't a problem with the people that I do see there, who they do understand what has happened to us. There is no problem. But it was very hard to find. And initially, upon seeking treatment in the different hospitals, trying to get the treatment, my mother had figured out I was injured fairly early on. And because she was still working physically at the hospital, she then inserted herself into the situation and pulled those different doctors aside, without me being present. There is no relationship, there is no contact. She knows nothing about me, and that's been the case for decades. So here she was working there, figuring out something serious had happened to me, and she was pulling those doctors aside and telling them that what I'm saying is not real. I've always had this mental disorder. And because she has an employee badge hanging from her neck, in stating she's my mother, they believed her. Not comprehending there's no relationship, there's no contact. This woman's been behind the scenes criminally harassing me for decades, using other people and agencies. And the injury was never questionable. At this point, we already knew what it was. And because she was stating those things each hospital visit, And it wouldn't be right away because she didn't find out I was there right away, but she'd eventually figure out we were there trying to get treatment. And then she'd insert herself and tell them this stuff. And then they still would just believe what she was saying. Not the fact that it's already diagnosed. We know the source. It has all come out at the place that caused all of this. It's not questionable. This is 100%. And at this point, I had two brain injuries. It had already broken through my brain on in every layer of the brain tissue. It had broken through. All the carbon monoxide had flooded. I was walking around that way, barely able to get from room to room in my house. Could not get myself from point A to point B because I was that close to death. That extreme state of suffocation. There was literally like 50 symptoms at once at any given time for the first 2 to 3 years. And it was very extreme the first like 2 years of this. So while I'm trying to seek treatment, I could not string sentences together. My brain had exploded internally, every layer, all around, and it was sagging and swelling continuously. So to try to describe what's going on, and I'm trying to tell these people with each visit, they thought I had a mental disorder and or a drug problem because of how I sounded, what I looked like, how I was delivering the information. And then if you don't understand carbon monoxide poisoning, it appears that way. And just ironically, she had been telling people this. My mother had been telling people I had a mental disorder and a drug problem for decades prior to this injury occurring. Not within the medical system, because I had no role in the medical system. I had nothing to do with the medical system for 20 years. Not in that sense, but she was running her mouth to all her hundreds of family members all around town. Every person she ever knew, she was saying this stuff about me too. So once we did become injured, and here she was pulling these people aside, telling them this false information about me, they would just kick me right out of the hospital without treatment. And I gave up seeking treatment twice, knowing we were just going to die. We were just slowly slipping away with any little breath, because then we were still trying to get groceries here or there, or I was trying to get the money to keep my bills going, because I'm the one paying for everything. I'm the one running our lives and building our lives. It's my money that pays for everything. So at a certain point, after I was off for some months, but I'm also self-employed, so I was controlling when I would go try to work, and it would only be 4 or 5 hours at a time. It would not be very often, and it would not be for very long. It was less than 10 hours a week, 10 hours a week max. And sometimes I couldn't go at all for a month. So I would do those things, and we would have little exposures. My son was mostly kept homebound the first 5.5 years of his life. And we would just go to try to seek treatment, or we were only getting groceries, and we weren't going anywhere else. But those little bits of carbon monoxide that we were taking in, just getting behind the wrong vehicle in traffic, were putting us very close to death. It was literally one breath of 1 part per million was putting us very close to death. And we were already in an extreme state of suffering with many symptoms, and then that would put us even closer to death. So because she was having others enter this information into our medical files, they would literally just look at me and then kick me out. And it was because they don't understand how carbon monoxide poisoning works. And then they wanted to believe this deranged employee who claims to be my mother, and they all immediately think of their own mother, not the deranged lunatic I've been dealing with my entire life, who has no role in my life. There's no contact. Nobody was comprehending that. They weren't even asking. They 100% would believe her. This all happened behind my back. This was never done in front of me. I do have some of the medical records and some of the things that were said. So I'm aware that that's where the information came from, and that's what was done. On top of the way I was treated, or lack thereof, the way I was being treated when I would try to seek help. So the problem is our injury. This is an extreme medical emergency. We needed oxygen immediately. Over a year went by before we ever got any oxygen at all. And that's just one treatment. And we were so overloaded with the gas that it took years of treatment to remove the bulk load of it. And we're still overloaded with it today, like 8 years later. So to be in that extreme state with that many symptoms for that long of a period of time, it was intolerable. And when I would try to speak to these people every time there was a visit, they weren't comprehending what I was saying because the initial medical emergency, once it happened, was never treated, and it was ongoing every second of every day going forward. It never went away. And then we'd have these little bursts of carbon monoxide that are safe for the general population. And this is us like fighting to stay alive, being homebound. Having these tiny little exposures was putting us so close to death we'd be forced to seek treatment again. And this happened many times. And then when we'd go seek treatment, either the damage was already done because there was already false information put in our file, or she physically inserted herself again. And I believe she did so 3 different times. And that information, she would give them more, she would do this again and give a different person this false information about me. And each person would operate on her delusions. But mind you, this is all going on because she is attempting to make sure I do not survive so she can gain access to the rest of the stolen trust fund that she had already fraudulently gained access to. That's what she was going for. And on top of it, she does have Munchausen by proxy. So it's these 2 situations that this is why this is going on. And then when we'd seek treatment, let's just say she wasn't physically in that building, the information is already in our medical files. So then when I have a tiny little exposure, and it doesn't even have to be carbon monoxide, this might be anything, and we're just in an extreme state of suffocation, barely alive, barely getting any oxygen in, because it's overloaded in the cells. It's blocking from absorbing properly. It's not a breathing problem. So a lot of people are very confused about how it all works. It's blocking the oxygen from being carried to where it needs to go in the body. So it doesn't have to do with being a breathing problem. It's an oxygen absorption problem. And even the people at the hospital did not understand this. So if I was trying to seek treatment and she wasn't there, they pull me up, they see the false information, we'd still get kicked out. They're operating on that false information that she had given them, that she had put in there. So where we are today, the only proper medical documentation in my files is my primary doctor and Charmaine, who's the main mental health professional that's been involved for over 5 years. All of the rest of them did not stay long term, or I had to fire them because they began operating on the false information and the delusions, which is the whole reason I had to bring one in the first place. So those are the only 2 that are active in my situation that have proper medical records pertaining to our situation. Everything within all the hospital systems is false. And then same with my son. He's got a bunch of false information in his medical file. And then what was going on with us in the treatment center that's now closed, the Oxford Center, those records were real. But because they're under federal investigation and the building is on lockdown, I don't even have access to those files. In the current day, I'm going to have to see if I can reach out to the Attorney General's office to get the records that they have of mine, because they were where we were treating long term to remove this carbon monoxide. And they're still being investigated. It is a very large case. I do believe they can get those for me if they had not been deleted, because I am aware that that facility was deleting their records once the hyperbaric oxygen chamber explosion happened. So I will have to get with somebody on that. Those are the only people who have true medical records on us. So with the hospital systems, we were never able to get treatment. We kept being kicked out immediately. There was one doctor who gave me an hour and a half of oxygen at one point within Beaumont. He must have overlooked some of this false information, or I don't believe he was digging into my medical file. He seemed very busy, but he understood what I said to him when this all happened. And he did give me an hour and a half of oxygen at one point, and all it did was get me back to the extreme suffering I was in before I had that one little exposure. But we were never going to get out of the situation without being under proper treatment and removing this at a cellular level with the hyperbaric oxygen treatments. If I had never found the center, if I had not had my life's work behind me, if I had not made the money that I've made my entire lifetime, we would have never survived anyway. So part of this problem is here we were trying to get more medical treatment with every little breath that we were taking, even though we were mostly homebound. This is why we couldn't go anywhere, on top of the fact that we had numerous brain injuries and were incapacitated for about 3 years. Um, Without there being treatment to remove what's causing all of this, that's why it's called a medical emergency. And this is widely known. So it's very ignorant that this was all happening to us. But without removing it, this was never going to change. And then where we were at with it and how severely injured we were, how overloaded we were with it, with the brain injuries, we weren't going to live much longer. And I knew that. I knew exactly where I stood, how long I had left, how many more hits I could take before I just wasn't going to be here anymore. Same with him. He was in the same exact boat with me. And nobody was comprehending that the initial medical emergency was never addressed. Nobody was comprehending that we actually have the worst case possible scenario where the people got to live, um, and are still alive and still fighting to try to get treatment. And it's an intolerable way to live. You can't live that way. There's no quality of life. There's no doing anything, just completely homebound, suffering 50 symptoms at once all day, every day for years. And just trying to get basic groceries and getting behind one wrong car going 5 minutes down the road would have us back near death, even closer than what we were. So these hospital employees were seeing this false information, and then they were operating on it every time we tried to seek help. And then at one point, after Beaumont had kicked me out many times, this has happened many times, I ended up at Henry Ford, where there was a resident who understood what happened. And then he was understanding what I just said about how the initial injury, the initial overload had never been treated. And we've been stuck like that since. It's not going to change without treatment. He actually understood everything I was saying. He was the only one that I came across who understood it out of any of this. But because it needed to be treated long term at a hyperbaric facility, and no hospital, even if they have hyperbaric chambers, they don't ever give you more than 5 treatments. We had such an extreme case. I've had well over 1,000 hyperbaric treatments. I don't know exactly how many my son has had, but I've had probably close to 2,000. And that degree of carbon monoxide poisoning is never being treated in any hospital ever. So he understood all of that, and he did give me oxygen 2 separate times. And he just said, you need to keep doing what you're doing, keep figuring out how to get the treatment. And I was just like, I can't hold on much longer. I can't, there's no quality of life. I can't do anything. I can't even get us to the treatment. I can't keep explaining it. My brain was so injured, I couldn't explain myself. But that was the only person who had attempted to help. Now, when it came to us repeatedly going to different hospitals for treatment, my son had visited numerous other hospitals outside of the ones I saw for myself. So we sought treatment at 2 Beaumont facilities, 1 Henry Ford facility, downtown in Detroit. So I think it was the Detroit Medical Center. And then in Ann Arbor, there was Mott's Children's Hospital connected to U of M. It's a part of U of M. For my son at one point. This is when we were very close to death, right before we found the treatment center. There was one night where he got rushed to 3 different hospitals in a 24-hour period, all within one day. And here I was near death with him, and I didn't even have the ability to get us there or back. We actually took an ambulance. That third visit, I couldn't even drive. And we took an ambulance, and then we were stranded because of the time of morning. It was like 5 or 6 a.m. when we ended up leaving the one facility. But this was when we were very close to death, right before I found the center. And we stayed that way. We stayed that way for 14 months before beginning treatment. So that was all at the hands of my deranged mother. She caused all of that false information that these people were operating on to be in our files every time we were trying to get help. just knowing we're not going to make it, we're not going to live. I already know it. If someone doesn't treat us, if we don't start treatment and continue and maintain it, I already knew we weren't going to live. And then it didn't take, once I found the private center, it took till I was about 60 treatments in, all back to back. For the most part, I did them every couple of weeks for the first 2 or 3 months. It was about 2 months, I think. I did that, and then started 4 days a week because I was so overloaded. I had to slowly start to remove it because I couldn't get in the chamber and down under pressure and up comfortably. I was in such an extreme state of suffocation internally at a cellular level from all of this. And I stayed that way during all these treatments for a good 2 years before, it was over 2 years for sure, before that was reduced to a more comfortable level to get us in and out of the chamber and down and under treatment and back up. So it was very severe. And she caused all of this to happen to us. So, like with the false information in all of those different systems, I don't believe the Children's Hospital in Ann Arbor for my son had some false information because she had no ties with that hospital at that time. Separately, the Detroit Medical Center is connected to the hospital where I gave birth, and so they were covering up, had nothing to do with my mother. She didn't have ties to that hospital, but they were covering up the birth injury because that was, that was the hospital system where I had the baby. So they were covering up that on their own. The Mott's Children's Hospital in Ann Arbor, they were not addressing the situation properly. They were not comprehending the degree of what had gone on in the state we were in. So they were not addressing it properly. And then the other hospitals, I don't believe initially their systems were connected, but I do believe at some point they did become connected, or my mother had managed to insert herself into the Henry Ford medical system and talk to somebody to get that false information put in, because down the line we did have to seek additional treatment for my son. I believe this was 2022. After Ford Motor Company had spilled all the gasoline by my house and we got stuck out and about in the rain, and the rain stirred it all up, he lost a lot of oxygen rapidly, took in a lot of particles, and it cut off all the oxygen to his brain. He had all these red spots all over his face, and we did have to seek treatment at a hospital, and we were not treated in the Henry Ford system, as that resident had treated me previously and understood what was going on with us. At this point, I don't believe he was there anymore because it had been some years. And by this time, we were not treated. My son was not treated properly. We were actually put in a mop room, and not even allowed into the hospital at that point. And you could tell by what they were saying to me and what they believed to be my situation. They had some false information. So it's either the two hospitals eventually had like their systems linked and they could see, or my mother had then inserted herself and called and got some information put there along the way, because she knows how to place all of these delusional phone calls and climb the ladder to the top of whoever's in charge at whatever's going on, whether it's a hospital system or any other system or agency. That's what she does. That's how she operates. But with the hospital system, she worked in it for 45 years, so she knows how all of it works. So it was one of those two things that happened with the Henry Ford situation. And then she did work for Beaumont. So that was all going on throughout the entire course of our injuries. And once we found the private center 14 months into the extreme part of the injury, we never sought treatment at another specialist's office or another hospital for our injuries and what we were dealing with. We never again sought treatment at any facilities other than the treatment center, and we knew what the problem is, and all we have to do is remove it and treat. And so from that point forward, that's what we did for 6 years straight, until they closed down earlier this year. And then his pediatrician's office was aware that this was our situation, and he kept getting rushed back to the hospital. He kept being seen, and nobody's doing anything about it, much like me. Nobody's doing anything about it. So his pediatrician's office, once we knew everything, the full scope of it all, they were aware. And then when I found the center, I basically said, this is where we're going to be. I'm not asking for your permission. Hopefully we never see you again. And then once we started treatment, he was never brought back to his pediatrician's office. There was no need. Everything we were there for was caused by the overload of carbon monoxide. So it was my mother who did all of this. To where we have things today with what's going on and why it took so long to get treatment, how we ended up at the center, all this false information within our medical records, and it's still in there. So let's just say something where if I had a large enough exposure, because this did happen to me, this happened to me in 2023, in June of 2023, I took in too many wildfire particles from the outside air and fell over dead at Walmart. All the oxygen was cut off from my brain while I was standing from being driving from point A to point B with the wildfires. And then I acquired 2 additional brain injuries in one because the oxygen was cut off from my brain. That's what caused me to fall over dead. And then I cracked my head open and lost a lot of blood from the head and was laying there dead, unresponsive for 15 minutes and came back on my own without medical intervention. And they all called 911 because I was deceased in the middle of the store with my young child by myself. Ironically, his dad and my other kids separately were at the store across the street from us when this happened. So everybody got there fairly quickly, and the ambulance was there by the time I came to. But I already knew the hospitals locally were not going to treat me. I already knew that. That's why I was trying to say no, I wasn't going to go. And everyone watched me lay there dead for those 15 minutes. There was a lot of people who saw all of this, and they were all just like, no, like, you need to go. And I'm just thinking, I already knew what I was thinking because I already knew I wasn't going to receive help. So I get taken to the hospital. I managed to tell the guy in the ambulance that what the problem was. I knew what the problem was. And he did give me the oxygen, and the hospital was fairly busy that day. And when I came to in the hospital, I was in the hallway. And then it took a little while to get a room. And I just knew I needed to breathe the oxygen because I most likely wasn't going to receive any treatment. And that's exactly what happened. They got me back there and immediately started saying they already have all this false information in their file. So, or in my file in their system, they see all these times they've removed me acting like I've never been poisoned, that I have this mental disorder, this drug problem. They rode heavily on that, continued on with it, acted like the effects and what just happened to me was not from these ongoing effects, and kicked me right out of the hospital because they did not want to believe reality and the fact that they had already covered this up numerous times. And they had in their system, all these different visits along the way prior where they kept acting like that's not what was going on. And so they continued on with that and just kicked me out of the hospital. Didn't want to believe that I'm under treatment at this private center. And I kept telling them where I treat at, what's going on. They didn't want to believe any of that. They wanted to do a CAT scan. I said, I can't have radiation. It would cost like $10,000, $5 to 10 grand out of pocket to remove the radiation that would be going into my system from that. My cells would be burning at a cellular level. I had already taken so many setbacks, so many re-injuries, so many hits, that I was already barely holding on and barely able to work the little bit that I was. And I knew that I couldn't have any radiation because I'd stay in an extreme state of suffering all over again. And that my body can't tolerate radiation. It adds to the carbon monoxide that's burnt up in my cells, and it burns and adds right to it and creates severe ongoing symptoms until it's all removed, which would take 5 to 10 grand out of pocket at the private center. They didn't want to believe that. And then a different time, I was also brought, same hospital, brought back to Beaumont, and that was in May of 2021. And same thing happened that day. And my head was cracked off the garage floor in my garage. And they didn't want to believe that I was under treatment at this private center, that this is what's been going on. That part of my brain that got hit had just stopped throbbing after years of everyday treatment, and that I couldn't have any bits of carbon monoxide. I was brought in handcuffs, fraudulently arrested on my mother's delusional phone call placing to my city's police department, believing that my house is not my house, telling everybody that it's my ex's house. And that's why I was arrested and brought in handcuffs, even though it was me. This is my house, and I'm the one that was injured. The same exact thing happened. The hospital sided with the police with the false information that my mother had put in the medical file years prior, and with the police situation, they're believing the people at the hospital. They also took my mother's delusional phone calls in the background for years. And so they're operating together against me, acting like that's not what happened to me, acting like I'm not a daily patient at the private center. At this point, I was daily for some years. And they did not try to contact my actual care team, anybody from my care team, not my primary doctor, not Charmaine, and not the center. And they were all acting like that's not real, and that it was all being made up. And um, because of what they did, they said that they didn't see anything, nothing's wrong. And I'm like, no, it's continuous. Like that spot just reopened, got hit and was reopened. And they were not, whatever, I forget what scan they did, but whatever they did, they couldn't see it. It didn't matter. In the initial injury, you still couldn't see the injury in the initial, when it first happened, you couldn't see any of that on the scans either. So I already knew that from years prior, and then that happened, and they still were acting like that's not what happened to me or that's not what's been going on, still refusing to contact anyone from my care team, kicked me out of the hospital, sent me back to jail, where they then exposed me to so much more carbon monoxide that it ripped back the brain tissue that took years of daily treatment to repair. And I'm still not back where I was before that day in 2021. So that hospital system all these times operated on the false information that my mother had put in in their system. She gets others to do it, so her name's not directly tied to it. She pulls people aside. She was still working, had her badge hanging from her neck. She says she's my mother. They believe her, and so she did this with numerous different people. Those people put the information in the system, so when these other people see it, they operate on it 100%. And every time I'm booted from the hospital, which makes no sense because I had no medical history whatsoever for 20 years in any medical system. The only thing I've had is a chiropractor since the late 1990s, and that's like I still see him today. So he saw all of this happen to me as well. He knew me long term. He knew there was something wrong when this was all first happening to me. So those records are also correct. But there was no medical history. And then once we found the private center, we then had no visits to any specialists or hospitals or anything from that point forward until something extreme happened. And every time there's something that we do end up back there, it's from the effects of the initial injury that we suffer from with both of us. So it doesn't matter each time we're not treated, and it's due to the false information in the medical files that was done by my mother. So when it comes to my dad's injury, now she did numerous things, numerous different times, numerous hospitals. What she did was the first time she managed to get me banned from Vibra Hospital in Taylor, Michigan. That was the first one she managed to get me banned from where my dad was at. She's the one who caused all the problems leading up into that moment when all that happened. She was creating all this chaos, all these problems in the background that caused me to have to go in there and basically tell her she's going to be going to prison. Long term, I already knew this was going to be the case at some point. She's not going to be getting away with this forever. Eventually, she will be doing the rest of her life in prison when all of this comes out 100%. So with what happened there, she created all of the chaos that caused the situation to happen. Then she got all of the people at the top because she knows who has what type of power and which positions. She got all of those people involved. I believe two of the people, their names were Makia Moore and Celesta Washington. And then I do believe she got somebody from the top tier of the hospital, like management or something. I don't know to what degree she climbed the corporate ladder and got somebody near the top. And she managed to get me banned from seeing my dad. And I had been there almost every night from the time of his injury, even though I'm sick and injured myself, in homeschooling my sick and injured child. So that happened about 8 months into my dad's injury, 8 or 9 months into his injury. She managed to do that. And she did it to gain control. And then I do believe she's been telling these hospitals that I threatened her with a gun, or I threatened my dad with a gun, or both of them. She's saying things that aren't real to get them to ban me. And instead of them investigating or hearing anything I have to say, they 100% believe her because she was a Beaumont employee because Vibra is attached to the Taylor Beaumont. So they believe whatever she says. She says she's my mother. They believe her. They don't believe that she's ever done anything wrong. They don't even ask me. When I'm telling them I need several police officers, I need a detective. This has been going on for decades. She's been doing this and this and this. Like, I have the proof of all this. But again, at this point, I'm living in extreme chaos from all the ongoing crimes and harassment that she's caused me. And at no time are these people even questioning me or allowing the police to step in and hear what is actually going on. They believe whatever it is she says. These are all delusions. Whatever, I don't even know exactly 100% what she's telling them, but I do know that they're all delusions. It's all made up information. So she tells them that. They operate on it. They ban me. She did the same thing with U of M Hospital in Ann Arbor. She did the same thing there. And they also did not investigate at any level. I even contacted their police department, and they even managed to make my reports disappear. They also banned me, and I do believe she had told them that I've always had this mental disorder, this drug problem. I'm known to lie. I threatened them with the gun or something along those lines, because then you would be banned from a hospital. So she managed to do that as well. She got ahead of the game, and she told numerous different departments there that I'm going to be this problem, and I'm known to lie, and I say all these things that aren't real. Everything I'm saying is 100% facts. These are all facts. This is how she operates. This is what she does. And they don't want to believe it, and I can prove it. So again, nobody's looking into anything. Nobody's investigating. They just straight up banned me from the entire hospital. So now where we are today with it, still, if something were to happen to my son or I and we need to go get emergency medical treatment, we're still not going to receive. If it's an emergency, it's going to be a lot harder for me to get all the way down to Ohio to get to a hospital. If I'm having something extreme happening, it's not going to be that easy to get me down there, because it would be me having to try to get myself there. And if there's something extreme happening, most likely I'm probably not going to be driving. So all the hospitals where I live by my house, anything within driving distance, they're all either on the cover up because they've already participated in the crimes and the non-treatment and leaving us untreated all that time, or they have participated with my mother's delusions and the false information in the medical records, and they're continuing on with that. It doesn't matter if something happens to us, and now because what has happened with my dad and how she got us banned from seeing my dad. So that happened in April of 2024 with U of M, and that happened in September, I believe, of 2023 with the Vibra Hospital in Taylor. So no matter, these are all these hospitals, and then the other ones I'm talking about are the other ones nearby me that have already done this to me and my son. So we can't get treatment. Now they have false information, with my name, but it's pertaining to me as a visitor. It doesn't matter. They see all of this false information. We can't even get treatment if something happens to us. And now that the center's closed, this makes for a very life-threatening situation, because that was our lifeline to stay alive, and we no longer have that. So she's responsible for all of this. And I do believe she did all this by stating that I threatened them with a gun, or I think it's numerous things. I think she tells them that I've always been known to lie. I'm this mental disorder drug addict. You can't believe anything I say, that I've threatened them with a gun, or that I brought a gun to the hospital, or something along those lines. This is stuff that she has been telling all of these people since my dad's injury, and then did the same thing at the care facility where my dad is. And I do believe that's why they called 911 on me a year ago when I went to go see him. I do believe that's what was said to them. And that is part of how she managed to get me banned from there initially in April of 2024. So it's her running her mouth. These are all delusions. She knows how to manipulate. Her ability to manipulate and lie is so extreme. All of these people who she comes in contact with, and the way she delivers the information, they believe her. 100% of these people believe her without ever talking to me, without hearing anything that I have to say, which are facts and I can prove, and nobody investigates. When I ask for police officers to assist in the situation, they act like that's not what's going on, or they don't allow me to bring the police, or they act like they sweep it under the rug and just act like the police can't come do this, or they can't investigate. Like the hospital at Vibra, they said, "Oh, you just said it's been going on your whole life. See, you are the problem." No, she's been doing this my whole life. She's been committing these crimes my entire life, is what I'm saying. I already had enough information. I had been piecing this together for years at this point. I already had a lot of information, but again, I was living in extreme chaos. Back to back injuries, like from my son and I being in the extreme part of our injury, and then going right into my dad being injured, living in extreme chaos, nothing but extreme chaos. And then the gas leak forcing us from our home, forcing us to buy the home in Ohio, living in extreme chaos during all of this. So I didn't have time to make all these police reports. Doesn't matter. A lot of these cities' police, their police officers are involved in the crimes as well. So I wasn't getting anywhere. I wasn't able to deliver the information properly or launch an investigation, or I don't have time to argue and go back and forth when I'm suffering continuous symptoms myself. And then I'm chasing my tail in circles, and she's causing all of this to happen. None of these people are allowing me to explain anything. They're not wanting to talk to me. They don't even want to hear what I have to say. They just believe her 100%, no questions asked. All of these people are involved. And then with U of M, I can point out the individuals. I don't know all of their names, but if you were to take me there, I could show you who's involved in different departments. There's a couple different people in different departments who are involved in what happened at the U of M hospital, and then making that police report disappear altogether. They call the deranged lunatic herself, and their idea of verifying what I'm saying is true is by calling the deranged lunatic herself and her feeding them false information about me, and them going, "Oh, okay." That's their idea of investigating, not an actual investigation. And what I'm saying is what she's doing and what the problem is and the crime she's committing. No one's actually looking into it when I have the proof, when I'm telling them I have the proof. Same thing with the Beaumont Royal Oak, because that's where my dad was when he first fell. Same thing there. She managed to climb to the top and get numerous people involved and put false information into my dad's medical file about me. I do believe she said that I threatened them with a gun. That is where her sister chased me from the hospital room right after my dad's fall. My mother was not even back in the state yet. Several days later, still had no intention on coming back till his work bought her a plane ticket after his injury. And so there was several employees within that Beaumont who participated. I do have their cards, their business cards upstairs. I know the main person in there was Abigail Berlin. And then I spoke with her boss. And then I spoke with somebody near the top of the chain in that hospital on a different day. I spoke to numerous levels, numerous people. Doesn't matter. They're believing the deranged lunatic because she worked there for 45 years and she sounds believable and just telling people she's my mother and she has all this information about me, none of which is real. So all of these hospitals have done this. So banned me from my dad from numerous different hospitals and the long-term care facility with all this false information about me. And then now that, we've been chronically sick, we are permanently injured, we do suffer ongoing effects. That's been going on longer than my dad's injury. But now she's gotten additional information about me put in additional hospital systems on top of what was already in there from our injuries. So if we were to need to seek emergency medical treatment, we're not going to be able to get help no matter how you look at it. Not anywhere within driving distance of our home. That's insane. That's insane that she's been able to manipulate that many hospitals, that many people. These people are involved in the crimes. You are entering false information into mine, my son's, and my dad's medical file all about me. I even have one of the pages from the Beaumont in Royal Oak on my dad. I took it out of his he ordered his medical record from his injury. It was about 1,600 pages. He had me go through it at one point, and I found it. What those people all said about me, she was giving them this information. None of that stuff is real. I have the paper. I have what was said about me. So all of these people are responsible for putting all this false information about me in their systems. This is all provable. And then each person that I've said this to, I said, we can verify this. I'm the one who hired the mental health professional. I'm the one who brought her in to document these ongoing crimes. We know who the problem is. She knows who the problem is because my mother's over here calling Charmaine, telling on herself every step of the way for several years before she realized that that's what she was hired for. Not because somebody told me I had a mental disorder. That was never what was going on at any time during this. The police are all involved in the crimes, can't make police reports. Here we were fighting for our lives when she was brought in. Here all this harassment was going on against us, and we're still fighting for our lives while this is going on. She's controlling the people's behavior of the people around me. And this has just gotten so far out of hand. She was brought in. And she can verify, because then here my mother had called her regularly over and over the course of some years. So now the lady has a clear view of who the problem is and what is exactly going on. And I told her this from the very beginning when I brought her in, that this was the case. This is a situation. You'll see, because she's going to tell on herself. You'll see, which she started to do a couple months in. Didn't take very long. She started to see right away. So when I'm telling these different hospitals that we can verify all of this, we know who the problem is. They don't even bother to verify the professional that's been involved for 5.5 years, watching all this play out, documenting all the crimes, all the malicious activity, all the criminal actions of my mother. She knows exactly what has happened because then my mother tells on herself. And none of these people would verify it with her. They just immediately think, because then my mother says, oh, yes, she's got this mental disorder. See, that's why the woman exists. Well, nobody's ever hired a mental health professional to document the ongoing crimes because nobody's ever been in a predicament like me. So when they hear that, they immediately believe I just have this mental disorder and this drug problem, because it says it in the one sheet that I have this drug problem and this mental disorder. None of that's real. It's never been real. It can all be verified. So none of these people, not one person at any of these facilities ever once stopped and contacted Charmaine, as they should have, including Adult Protective Services numerous times as well, because there's people involved there who also did not verify any of this, that my mother is a danger to my dad, that she has been committing all these crimes, that she has prevented treatment, that she's been poisoning batches of food. There is proof of this. So I will talk about that in a different video, about how she poisons batches of food and how she's been doing so since I was a young child, and she's been doing it all along. It's never stopped. It's still going on as far as I know. And then she nearly got away with finishing my dad off last spring, and I almost got her caught, and that's why she had to get me banned from U of M and the care facility, because I was a threat to exposing everything she was doing. So I will talk about that in the next video, because she had been poisoning batches of my dad's food regularly since he became injured. He went into septic shock many times. There's all these repeated hospital visits. There's a lot to that poisoning of the food long term, way before our injuries or anything that's been going on since I was a small child. And so I will talk about that in its own video. That is part of the Munchausen by proxy as well. But it's very ignorant what has gone on, and what these people all believe, the crimes they've all participated in, what's all happened. I have the proof. I have a lot of this stuff in my hands. And what I don't have, I can tell you where to find it, and you're going to find false information that is verifiable. It's all verifiable. All this false information, you can verify it to be false. But nobody's ever taken the time to look into it, to investigate, or even talk to me about the reality of anything going on. Everyone just believing the deranged lunatic because she says she's my mother. That's insane. So anyway, I'll be back with more on the Munchausen by proxy and the poisoning the batches of food and the different forms of the Munchausen by proxy, because it's numerous forms. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about the hospital situation, how we're never going to be able to get treatment anywhere near our home. If should something happen to us down the line, and we do suffer ongoing effects, so it's very dangerous. It's very risky, and we're banned also from visiting my dad, or pretty much probably anybody else. If they run my name, they're gonna see that I'm banned from these facilities. So I will be back with more. Just had to talk about all of that and how absurd all this is, because this is unheard of. I guarantee there's no situation like what I had just explained, with somebody being banned as a patient and as a visitor from that many hospitals, pretty much every hospital within driving distance of my home. So I'll be back with more. Thanks. Bye.